I felt the call to ordination, and so started training in 2001. And I was quite surprised that going into another major institution of this country, the church, I found similar levels of stereotyping and racialization of Black people in those institutions as well, and experienced certain amounts of prejudice throughout my training, and then recognized that not only in the training institutions and the people attending, but also in parish life and diocesan structures, there were high levels of racialized attitudes towards people of color, which often meant that people were not brought forward for or accepted for training as stipendiary, that's full-time ministers, and often not as leaders of the Anglican Church as well.
So my primary involvement in racial justice comes out of my own spiritual journey of seeing my own caste privilege and prejudice, etc., from a Hindu background, rejecting that, becoming an atheist, and then coming to Christ at university. And I think I was rather rudely shocked to find racism within the church, which I didn't expect to encounter. My primary area of racial justice work was with the London Baptist Association from 2003 to 2018. And as Baptists, we pride ourselves on being people of the word. And one of the things that I encountered after my appointment was racial justice work takes away time, effort, and resources from the work of mission and evangelism. That this is a waste of time, this is a social gospel agenda, that we shouldn't touch it as evangelicals, was the kind of sentiment that I would hear. And my thinking was very much, well, that doesn't fly with my Hindu family and community, who say your church is riddled with caste and race prejudice. Who are you to say anything about Christ to us? You don't have a leg to stand on. And that, if you like, prompted me to say, well, what are the scriptural foundations? If we say we stand on scripture, what are the scriptural foundations to actually address these matters? So I developed courses on how and why we should talk about racial justice, why it's important to do so, why you can't actually preach a gospel of reconciliation if you don't practice it, because as the Lord often, pointed out to the Pharisees, they were hypocrites, and that's what the world looks at us and says, you're a bunch of hypocrites. You preach this, but you don't practice it. And so it was really developing courses and so on to do that.
Remember those days of the 80s of what was called the riots, young people in the streets agitating for justice. I remember 3 days and 3 nights being in the streets of Handsworth, and being there and running at the police alongside young people. I mean, I didn't carry anything in my hands, but I was with the young people who were about my age, in their middle 20s, and just feeling the intense anger in young people at the way police were harassing them and treating them, and the violence and the racism of police. That's nothing new, that issue which is being talked about now. It's been there. Back in the early 80s, a young man called Clinton McKerbin was killed while he was being arrested by a policeman in Wolverhampton. The George Floyd of our times, all those years ago, and organizing a massive march against police violence and racism in Wolverhampton. And it didn't catch much attention, but we were there, and the issues which are before us are not new, and as it's been said, they're not going to go away. Racism is like COVID. It's there, and it impacts everyone, and we're going to have to deal with it all through our lives, and people who follow us will be having to do exactly the same.
I'm not convinced, Richard, that it has really been on the agenda of the church, if I'm honest with you. I think issues around multiculturalism and inclusivity and diversity have been. But I think there are huge theological differences between those things and racial justice. I think the thing about racial justice is that it calls for and demands radical change from within, which impacts the external. That is a huge internal paradigm shift which white people need to participate in. And so I think many of them have been reluctant to actually engage racial justice because of the sacrifice it demands for racial justice to become a reality in the space that they navigate.
The answer is not Anglican. The answer is just the fact that structural racism continues to keep power in the hands of those who are white, male, and rich. And it means that class and gender and ethnicity continues to push people and oppress people. Black people are still viewed through the lens of slavery or imperialism, and their disempowerment continues through language, through culture, and an understanding that we're not as civilized still as others who seem to have felt that they had a task to civilize us. So racism continues. Indigit has said it, others have said it. We need to continue to fight against the structures which work to oppress people, and they will use whatever means to oppress. And ethnicity is a wonderful trope to use to push down a whole people, and it happens worldwide.